Well, basically, I was here in May. I left in May, went to Sierra Leone for about 5 months. I left on May 18th. And what I did was the first thing I had to work on various projects every 2 weeks, pretty much. So the first 2 weeks, I worked on a slum project, which is basically a livelihood skills training program for some of the youth in crisis or the war-affected youth. So basically, I was coordinating some entrepreneurship and life skills program for some of these youth because they're doing some vocational training. Basically, how these youth can go out there, start up their own micro enterprises and get out of poverty for themselves. So that was the first project I worked on. The second project I worked on was the European Commission supporting livelihood and governance in Sierra Leone, Liberia. So it's pretty much the same as providing livelihood and governance. So basically, livelihood in terms of how can they make a living for themselves. Learn something they could do. They could, get a job, gain employment. And the governance aspect of the project, which I was also involved with, is like how could you get the youth involved in decision making that affects them. So we had similar workshops, peer training workshops, and we also engaged in some peace building, and promoting peace within the country, anti-violence campaigns, and all sort of things. Then after that, I went to the provinces, which is also had the various YMCA, subsectors, I would say that. So what I was doing was also similar to what I did with the slum project and the European Commission supporting livelihood and governance in Sierra Leone, Liberia. So I work with some of the vocational trainees there, also teach them some entrepreneurship skills. And there's a YMCA agricultural investment in that region as well. So I had the opportunity of going there, see what they're doing, and advise how they could also, increase of how they could be productive, how the agricultural investment could be productive in that part of the country. As the war ended, some of the aftermath of the wars, some of the effects of the aftermath of the war are still lingering around the country. You have a lot of youths who are just on the streets, just snatching cell phones from people. I lost 2 cell phones whilst I was there. So, most of these youths are just on the street. They don't really have anything to do. So, they engage in all sort of social vices and things like that. But in order for the country to really develop, or let's say for the YMCA to support some of the programs, funding is needed to take some of these students from the streets, to get them off the streets and bring them to some of these training institutions. And it takes about, let's say, $150 to train one of these, for tuition fees, to train one of these students. So let's say, for example, we are running the Livelihood for Youth in Crisis project. So for one of these youth, you need about $150 per year to train them. So if we are trying to target about 1,200 youths, then you can do the math. So 150 by 1,200 per year. There are a couple of success stories. Some of these those that graduated in the past, they've set up their own small micro enterprises. When you're passing by the street, you see them, they just call you, wave to you. It feels nice. Now the YMCAs of Sierra Leone depends highly on funding. Like all the projects I mentioned, you have the slum project, supporting livelihood and governance in Sierra Leone, Liberia. All these projects are funded by donor NGOs. So they don't really have any income generating, mechanisms in place like the YMCA Canada has. For example, you have the Geneva Park where they actually, get some funds from that as well. But the YMCA Sierra Leone has a hostel, which is about probably 10 rooms, so it doesn't really generate much income. Then earlier on I mentioned the agricultural investment which they had. Even as that, they're making, if you do a cost and benefit analysis, you could tell that they are actually not making much of that. So it's very hard for such organization to actually succeed if there's no donor funding. Sometimes funding doesn't come on time. Donors also have to raise funds and things like that before they can send it to some of their partner organizations. So if funding doesn't arrive on time, pretty much the project will be at a standstill. So they would have to wait when funding arrives before they can continue. For the internship, specifically, the funding comes from CEDA, which is a Canadian International Development Agency trying to promote global citizenship for some of the Canadian youth like myself. But for some of the programs, such as some of the livelihood and agricultural investment, it's funded by the Simcoe YMCA of Simcoe Muskoka. So basically, that's how one of the ways by which the YMCA of Sierra Leone gets attract funding from in other YMCAs. As I've lived in both worlds, I know both worlds, you know. So I know people over there are living in much more, you know, tougher circumstances than people in other parts of the world. And I think that's not fair. You know, everyone has a right to at least live to the, you know, the sustainable means. Like some people are there that they don't do anything, you know. So how do you expect them to actually feed themselves or their children? So I really want to bridge that gap. That's also my motivation.